Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Sunday. I don't know how to add myself. I don't know how to add myself to the spotlight. Um, so I'll just be the invisible voice. But welcome, everyone. I will hand it over to Leo to do a more proper introduction since he had the privilege of seeing this presentation before. But we're very excited to bring in Amalia to talk about some of the research that she's been doing. She's been involved in this project since 2021. So has met a lot of you and seen a lot of the progress. And I don't think we've done one of these in a while. We haven't really done a research call, so this is going to be a really exciting update, I think. And Leo, if you have anything else you want to share before we hand it over to Amalia.
Hi, yeah. I had the privilege of seeing Amalia a few weeks ago at a scientific workshop that we organized in New York City. It was for kind of leading scientists in the world of dog cognition and interspecies communication, and um, it was really a great event. And Amalia kind of since then has been in the news a bunch, and like she had another paper come out in Nature, which those of you familiar with science will know is like the leading scientific journal, um, uh, like the number one in the world. We are very fortunate to have Amalia with us this weekend, given her no doubt quite busy schedule that she's experienced over the last number of days with interviews and everything. And um, yeah, it brings me great pleasure to be able to uh, introduce her and have her come chat with us.
Hi everyone, nice to see you, and thank you, Leo, for the lovely introduction. I am aware that in this call we're going to have both people who have been here from the very start, who might know me, and also people who might be maybe new to the community. So I'm actually going to give a little bit of history in this talk as well, so how I became involved and sort of how long we've been doing this for and how long it's been going. Um, but yeah, let's get the ball rolling here. So. I just want to, like I said, give a little bit of history. So some of you may have known me for a very long time. But as I said, I'll give a little bit of background. So I first became involved in the AIC using pets community in 2021 when I joined an internship that was co-led by Fluent Pet and UCSD to begin studying the technology and how it might shape how our relationships with our pets. And this was going on right as I was wrapping up my PhD, which was on animal cognition. And during my PhD, I studied parrots, corvids, and dogs. So a bunch of different species, not necessarily just dogs. And during this time, I really knew absolutely nothing of how these animals were communicating with buttons in people's homes. It was actually very new, right? Because it appeared at this scale during COVID. And so the goal of the internship really was to sort of gain an understanding of what was happening with these soundboards and to start thinking about how we might answer the big questions that we had at the time and about whether anything was happening. Because as some of you may remember, there was a lot of skepticism at the time as to whether pets were actually using AIC devices to communicate at all. There was plenty of, criticism online and among scientists of, the methods and that dogs and cats might just be pressing buttons for tricks. So that was sort of the fundamental first question. And as part of this internship, we began to develop ways to empirically test this question and sort of think about the sort of evidence that we would require to be convinced ourselves, first of all, but also to convince others, if it was the case that this was more than just a taught trick, that there was communication going on there. And so that's where I came in some time ago. So all these conversations and the internship actually led me to join the UCSD lab as a postdoc. And together with Professor Federico Rossano, we began putting some of these plans from the internship into action. And this was really successful and a great collaboration because we did end up publishing 4 papers on AIC using pets. 2 of these are empirical studies with dogs, and I'm going to talk about these empirical studies later on in the talk in some detail. So we'll see what it is that we did and what we found later on, but I just want to give you an overview for now. Towards the end of my time at UCSD, I was invited by a professor at Johns Hopkins University to join his lab afterwards. So I sort of left AIC for a little bit as the main focus, although I still kept working on it in the background. But I went on to work with apes and non-soundboard using dogs there. I had never worked with primates before, so here was my opportunity not only to work with apes, but most importantly to work with Kanzi. As some of you might know, that was the most famous sort of AIC animal in history, I think. So Kanzi was a bonobo who had a lexigram, an AIC device where he could, request things and have conversations and answer questions, and he actually understood hundreds of English words. So when I went to Hopkins, I got to work with apes, including Kanzi, and as Leo just mentioned, you might have seen recently in the news that our paper with Kanzi was published in Science earlier this month. And in this paper, we showed that Kanzi could track imaginary objects in a sort of pretend sort of tea party situation, if you like. And some of you may have seen this in recent days. But anyway, during my time at Hopkins, I was also lucky to be offered a job at the University of St. Andrews. And so now I've actually moved here in the summer, about 7 months ago, and I've just started my own lab in Scotland. And I've recruited some really brilliant young students to work on the questions that are, of my sort of passion. And amongst these are sort of work with AIC pets. So we're going to have a big focus, hopefully, on working with AIC pets in this community. So I'm really excited to get that work started because I think there's a lot of promising stuff, interesting science that we can do that should be fun for us and for you guys as well to participate in. Okay. So just to go back again, we're going to talk about the 3 empirical studies, 3 studies, 2 empirical sort of experimental studies that we've conducted with AIC pets so far and what they tell us about button use. So I'll preempt this section by saying that all the studies we have run so far have been with dogs. And the reason for my only working with dogs so far is that I don't have scientific training with the other most common AIC using species, which is cats. In fact, I've never owned a cat because I'm terribly allergic to cats, but I really love cats. There was actually a time I got very, very close to getting a Siberian because they have sort of lower FeLD1 enzymes, but I digress. Sort of end of the story is I would be more than happy to work with cats once I have a student who does have expertise with cats and has worked with cats. So if I recruit a PhD student who has worked with cats in any capacity, then yes, I would love to run studies with cats. But I would be doing a disservice to cats right now if I tried to do research with them without the help of a cat expert. So that's why most of the studies that we've done, well, all of the studies we've done so far have been focused primarily on dogs. And that's just because you have to have a really good understanding of how a species behaves and what they find motivating and what they find rewarding and so on to help the chances of the study succeeding. And so I wouldn't want to sort of find false negative results with cats just because I don't really know what I'm doing with cats, right? So anyway. So as those of you have been around since 2020 using soundboards, you might remember this. The AIC use with pets was surrounded by a lot of skepticism back then, far, far more, I think, than we encounter these days. And this came not only from people on the internet who are watching videos of dogs and cats pressing buttons, but also from scientists too. And that's because the whole field of interspecies communication is very, very contentious in science. And that's because it has a really convoluted history. So when researchers studied interspecies communication in the 60s and 70s, they did some really questionable things, like raising chimpanzees in their homes alongside human children, which is unethical for a million different reasons. But they also didn't do particularly good science. And so a lot of the research at the time overstated their results to the point that other scientists began to distrust these research programs. And so when the soundboard using cats and dogs first appeared all over Instagram, there was plenty of criticism from scientists too. And they were really concerned that button pressing was just a trick, or that it was always cued by the owner, or their owners were cherry picking videos and making up stories or making up context for accidental presses. And so our job as scientists was first to sort of beginning this huge new research program in interspecies communication, the first job was sort of do it responsibly and start with the most basic questions. And so we started with the first question, which is, do dogs even know what the words recorded on their soundboards are? Because there were people at the time who didn't believe that even that might be true, that they could associate words recorded on their soundboards with sort of events out there in the real world that they would link together. And so that's what we did in our first experiment. We asked exactly this question. So we visited 30 dogs' homes all over the US. We ran the same exact study with each one. In this study, there was me and another researcher. The other researcher went into people's homes, and I stood outside, as some of you who participated may remember, and they placed stickers on the dog's board. So they had different colors that changed for each dog, but basically they covered the buttons for concepts outside, food, and play with these colored stickers, and then they would add a new button as well with a new color. And the button was daxing, which was sort of a nonsense word, and the dogs should have no reaction to that. But the important thing was that I, as the other research, didn't know this. I was outside the house, so I didn't know which color was going on which button. And then at that point, the owners were given sleep masks and noise-canceling headphones, and they were asked to sit somewhere in the room in such a way that they wouldn't actually see what was going on when I was performing the trials of the study. And so by the time I come into the room, there were 4 buttons covered with stickers on the board, and I couldn't tell which button was which. And both the owner and me wore noise-canceling headphones, and sort of the first research went off to hide in a different room in the house. So there was a lot of coordinating people and getting the right setup. But basically, once everything was set up, they gave me instructions remotely on my headphones as to which color to press. And so I pressed the sticker color that I was told to press, and then ignored the dog and didn't move for a minute. And I had no idea what word it was. So what we wanted to see was, would dogs react appropriately to the button that I had just pressed, as if they understood what the words meant, but without any additional cues from me. So if I don't even know what I'm pressing, do the dogs still behave as they should if they understand the word? So would they be more likely to say, go to their toy basket when I press play, and more likely to maybe run to the door if I press outside? But it wouldn't make much sense, for example, to run to the toy basket if I press food or press outside. And yeah, as I said, because both me and the owner were completely unaware of what was being pressed, the dogs had 0 cues from either of us on how to respond, and so they only had the button sound to go off in terms of how they might behave. And because flying around a huge country like the US isn't really sustainable for every single study, we also wanted to test if we could use citizen science to ask these sorts of questions. Scientists, unfortunately, are also sometimes wary of citizen science because they don't trust that the results will be reliable. Be it because the methods won't be followed exactly, or because there are other, circumstances in the environment that researchers can't trust. And so we actually asked another 30 owners to also press these buttons on their dogs' boards and then wait a full minute without doing anything, and record what their dog's responses to their button presses would be. So again, removing any other contextual cues that might lead the dog to behave a certain way, they only have the word to go off. And so what we found was that dogs were more likely to respond appropriately to outside and play, meaning dogs were more likely to, for example, run to the toy basket after hearing the word play than if they had heard the word outside or food. And they were also more likely, for example, to go to the door after hearing the word outside than if they had heard food or play. And interestingly, the dogs didn't show more food behaviors, like going to their bowl when they heard the word food compared to the other buttons. And I don't think that's because dogs don't know what food means. I think that's because dogs are just always food motivated. So perhaps, or it could be that we just tested them at times that weren't their meal times, right? Because we're driving and flying across all the US, we couldn't necessarily go to people's homes when their dogs would have been fed. And so it might just be that pressing the food button would not have led them to expect a meal. So they might not have sort of gone to their food bowl in response to that press. But we did show that they responded appropriately to 2 words. And even more critically, we also showed that they responded the same way to the in-person study as they did in the citizen science study. So it doesn't matter if researchers or owners run the experiment, because the dogs were consistent either way. And this was a very, very nice result, because it shows that they do understand the meanings of some of the words on their boards at least, and that citizen science with soundboard using dogs can provide reliable results as well. So this was really, really promising for us and a great sort of first step. And of course, not every button on dog soundboards have such straightforward meanings as outside and play. We know now that owners have been teaching more abstract words as well. And one concept that really fascinated me was the help context. So we decided to test this with a very well-known paradigm in the animal cognition literature, which is called the impossible task or unsolvable task paradigm. And that's sort of when you present the animal with an equipment where they can get food out of, say, a Tupperware multiple times in a row, and eventually that Tupperware becomes locked. So they absolutely cannot get into it. And at that point, we actually see that dogs, for example, but also other animals, start exhibiting help, sort of soliciting behaviors where they will, for example, look at the owner or get in front of the owner or paw at the owner. And we were interested whether, above and beyond showing these sort of help behaviors, they might also use the soundboard and the help button because that would demonstrate that they have learned a more abstract word as well. Not something as simple as, outside means we go to the garden, or something as simple as food means there will be kibble in my bowl, but something more interesting than that. And so we presented a few dogs with these 15 dogs with sort of apparatus that we shipped out to people's homes over 5 different trials. In the 4 first trials, they could get into the apparatus and get the food. And then the final trial was an impossible task, and we wanted to see what they did. So what I'll show you next is a video of one dog and how they did. So this is how Parker performed. Can you still see my screen, by the way? Because I no longer have the outline around it.
We can
I
see your
still see it.
screen fine. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'll show you this trial of Parker. So this is the last trial. This is where the food container gets locked. So you see here that Parker goes to the owner first. So showing normal help-seeking behaviors that dogs that don't have soundboards show, which, suggests to us that, there we go. And then Parker goes to the board and then looks at the owner again, looks at Sasha again. Parker then leaves the sort of camera area, comes back, leaves again, but then comes back and presses help and look again. So this might not be surprising to some of you that have AIC dogs, but every single time I show this video at a scientific conference, people's jaws hit the floor because they don't expect that we would find such a neat result in a dog not only using help, but also using look when the owner is looking away. This is actually scientifically very, very interesting and something that our field has not shown before. This paper is currently under review, so hopefully it will come out soon. But what I want to say is, this is sort of the first evidence that dogs are doing something more interesting than, just pairing particular concrete words like outside or food or play with the sort of simple outcomes in the world, because help is a very abstract word and it can mean a bunch of different things. And it's extremely unlikely, in fact, I can tell you it is not the case that the owners actually trained this particular scenario before the study. So they might have, for example, modeled help when, a ball rolled under the couch, or when the dog wanted to look out the window and they wanted to open their curtains. There's many, many situations where the owner might model help to a dog, which are different to the context in which we presented this to the dogs. So this would be a novel context they applied help to. So what we found was that 2 of the 15 dogs pressed the help button in the impossible task. No dog pressed help in the solvable trials. So it's not that they just were pressing help all the time. They only pressed help when they actually needed it. As we saw from Parker, there was also pressing of look, which is very relevant because, of course, the owner wasn't looking. And this is actually not something we predicted to find in the data, but it's a really interesting qualitative finding as well. I will say that 5 out of 15 dogs actually tried to solve the task for the entire 3 minutes of the trial. And I think that's because this population probably is more used to, say, food puzzles and solving, problems by themselves than the average pet dog. And so my only regret that I have with this study is that the trial was only 3 minutes long, because I think if we had given them more time, if we had given them, say, 5 or maybe even longer minutes, they might have pressed help as well. So we could have had an even stronger result, perhaps. But a lot of the dogs probably saw this as a food puzzle, which, they probably are used to persisting at for quite a long time. And so they didn't press help because they were just occupied trying to solve the problem by themselves for a long time. But this is really interesting because, as I said, it shows a generalized help to a novel context as well. Okay, so these are the sort of two empirical studies. We also showed that dogs are not pressing randomly, and they're not pressing accidentally, and they're not just imitating what the owners are pressing. I'm not going to go into the details of that study because it is pure statistics and not as fun in terms of how it's run. But that's sort of the third study that, is really starting to show as well that dogs are doing this intentionally, and there's something potentially communicative going on here, which is exactly what we expected to see, and exactly what a lot of people didn't think that we would find. So I think it's been very rewarding to work with this sort of problem. And I will add as well that in that study, we also showed that some two-button combinations were more likely at the population level than others, which is again very strong evidence that the words on the buttons matter and the meanings matter to the dogs. Okay, so as you have seen, there's still a bit of an issue there, in that if you're going to fly out to people's homes, or if you're going to do citizen science studies that are very intensive, the sample size is restricted, so we can only have, say, up to 30 dogs per experiment, realistically, if we're going to do a lot of back and forth with the owners to collect that data. And so we're not taking full advantage of the potential sample size of thousands of dogs, because we know that there are thousands of pets out there using AIC soundboards. And so I've been working with Fluent Pet to hopefully come up with a really cool solution to that. So as you know, many of you, if not all of you, already report your button presses either manually or automatically through the app. And many of you will also have 24/7 cameras. Some of you have PetCube cameras in your homes, which are connected to the app, and they record the button presses in surrounding context, which is extremely helpful to the research team. But also, Fluent Pet is developing a technology that will allow us to hopefully change what's recorded on buttons remotely, so we can run some really cool studies at a very large scale, of course, with permission from the owners. We're not just going to mess with your buttons without asking you. And in order to sort of test out this technology, I had the help of Phoebe and her owner, and this is Phoebe and her board, and this is a button that Phoebe really likes. It says chips on the button. What it actually is a sort of nosework toy where Phoebe can sniff out for treats. And the goal here was to see what would happen and whether it would work if I could change what was recorded on Phoebe's button, chips. And so Phoebe's owner was pretty sure that Phoebe would press chips within the next couple of days or so. And so I changed the button around. I changed chips for later. And this is what happened. So she presses chips, and the sound that comes out of the board is later. And her owner asks her to explain what she meant. So she presses the button. And now Phoebe goes and presses the food button, which is a more sort of synonymous to what she actually meant. So this is a really, really promising first step. And of course, as I said, it would be the case that we would still recruit, owners and dogs that are interested in participating in this and get permission to do manipulations on the boards. And it would be very few manipulations, because we don't want to mess up
Amalia,
what you're.
is there supposed to be audio playing?
Yes, there is. Well, I can tell you what happened. Sorry, I think I didn't share my audio. So what happened was Phoebe pressed chips, but instead of the sound of the button coming out as chips, the button said later. Phoebe looked at the owner, a bit confused. The owner asked Phoebe to elaborate, so the owner just said, And instead of going back for the chips button, right, which is what you would expect if the button made the correct sound, Phoebe instead went to a different button. So she actually pressed food, which is more synonymous with chips than later, which is a sound that came out. So that suggests, very anecdotally, because it's one dog in one trial, but it suggests that Phoebe noticed that the button changed, and she sort of adjusted her communication accordingly. So this is a very, very promising avenue for future studies, and I'm hoping that the community will be excited to help us answer really important questions through this sort of thing. Okay. So I think the conclusion here really is the future is bright. So we have new technology for studying AIC using pets. And as I said, I have dogs that have used soundboards myself, so we're not going to mess up anyone's understanding of boards. We're very careful about when manipulations are done and make sure that we have consent from owners, of course. We also have studies starting up in 2 weeks' time or less. So I'll have information in the next slide of how you can sign up if you'd like. And it is really critical for me to say here, there's a lot of really cool science that we want to do and we can do, and I think there's really cool science that hopefully will show how powerful AIC can be. But of course, we need dogs to participate, right? Because we need a minimum sample size to be able to say anything about what we're studying. So I'm hoping that this will sort of get people enthusiastic about participating, and of course can answer questions at the end as well about the research. I have a group of students that are dedicated to working with AIC users that I've brought on, and I will sort of be increasing that over the years. And we have research questions not only about communication itself, but also I think really, really important questions about potential welfare benefits of soundboard use, because I think that soundboards can help increase the agency of animals, right? So it might be that there are certain things that they want to communicate with us about what they want and what they need and what they prefer or how they feel that you wouldn't know from their behavior alone. So I think that there is really, really interesting potential to see if there are welfare benefits for dogs and cats to soundboard use as well. And if you haven't already, I just want to sort of plug the documentary by PBS NOVA, which I thought was really excellent and shows sort of the first steps to our research and some amazing button using dogs in the community. In fact, if you participated in our in-person study or citizen science study and you gave permission in your consent form for your dog's videos from the study to be used in the media, you might also want to keep an eye out and see if you can spot your dog in the documentary as well. There's a slide where they have many, many, many sort of tiny videos of dogs, and your dog might be in there somewhere, so keep an eye out. And finally, I will stop there because I want to give time for an extended Q&A, but I will leave you sort of with this slide. So I have 2 QR codes here. The first one is to sign up for new studies. As I said, we have one that's starting up very, very soon. We might be ready to go within 2 weeks, if not less. We're pretty much there. And then if you want to do something now to contribute to research, we also have an ongoing survey study. So feel free to print screen this and sort of scan the QR codes and get onto them later. But it would be really appreciated to get your help. And just one point to note, if you have signed up for studies with UCSD, that does not mean you've signed up to studies with my university, because different universities require different ethics approvals. And so you would only be invited to participate in the studies for the PAWS lab at St. Andrews if you have registered with the PAWS lab at St. Andrews. You won't get invited through UCSD, although I think they might send an email around at some point soon, just alerting people to the fact that our new lab has started up. And with that, I think I will close, Kelly and Leo, so I can take questions because I can see the chat numbers popping up. So I'll be happy to answer questions.
So I grabbed 3 questions so far from the chat. I
Okay.
apologize if I missed anyone's. If I did, please just re-add it to the chat, or I think because this is a smaller group, if people want to raise their hands and are comfortable unmuting, you could ask Amalia directly. The first question was from Marcy. This was regarding the impossible task experiment, and she asked, did all of the dogs have a help button or something similar?
All the dogs that were recruited for the study have a help button, so we sort of filtered by dogs that had at least 3 buttons, and one of their buttons was a help button. So yeah, in order to be recruited for that study, you would need to have a help button. And that's something that, sometimes we have to do is filter by which buttons the dogs have. We also don't want to be telling owners to add buttons for the purpose of running a study, because every dog has different circumstances and different sort of needs, and it might make no sense to any given dog to have a button added to their board that doesn't suit their communicative needs. So we sort of filter beforehand.
Thank you. Um, Another question was regarding the Phoebe chips toy slash button experiment. And the question was, what would be the benefit of changing what's recorded on the buttons? I don't think that's standard even in human AAC to teach the location of words and then change them up.
Yeah, no, it's not standard in humans, and that's because we love to take what humans can do for granted, and we're not willing as a community, as a scientific community, to take things that animals do for granted. So, in order to prove that dogs understand, for example, what's on their buttons, we do have to show that they exhibit particular patterns of behavior in response to, for example, changes in their buttons. So, you can imagine a study, for example, where we change the sound of a button to white noise or to some weird noise, a siren sound. And that is a way to prove that the dog actually has an expectation of what's recorded on the button is if they respond to that change in a way that we predict. So, for example, by going to a different button or by seeming surprised by that change. So, yeah, no, it's not standard with humans, but the burden of evidence that we need for animals is unfortunately much higher than we need for humans. And that's just because they can't report their experiences to us directly. And so we have to sort of test these things in more strict ways than we can with people.
Thank you. Another question was, is anyone working on research related to best practice, like educational pedagogy of human-animal communication with buttons?
I think that's early days. We are interested in that. The easiest way to approach that would be through sort of survey work, but you would also have to be able to cross-validate what it is that the teacher did and how well the learner picked it up. And that's actually a very difficult thing to do because you'd have to quantify how competent they are, if you like, at their soundboard use. And so I think that that's a little while away because we still don't have a good understanding of how to quantify fairly because different dogs, as I said, have different buttons, they have different communicative needs. And so it's very hard to have sort of a common denominator across all dogs where we can say, okay, this dog understands their buttons better than this dog, right? Because understanding might look different to different dogs. And so it's really hard to say, this strategy works better than that one, just in terms of quantifying these things.
Mary Robinette asks, in the Nova special, your dog was only using buttons as a trick. Has that changed?
Yeah, correct. So my dog actually can use buttons communicatively, and that's how we started. So he started with buttons at 8 weeks old. I actually, at the time for the PBS NOVA documentary, they wanted a demonstration of how associative learning would look. And if you've looked at the PBS NOVA documentary and you compare that to how your own dogs are pressing buttons, it looks very different, right? So my dog is actually in the PBS documentary not even looking at the buttons. He's looking at me and he's pressing sort of very anxiously and not waiting to hear what's on the button. So we think actually, and we want to test this empirically, that there are a lot of behavioral signatures of a dog that's using buttons communicatively versus a dog that is just pressing buttons as a trick. And what I wanted to demonstrate in the documentary is that, you can teach them just as a trick, but it actually looks very different to when they actually communicate with the buttons. And I don't know if that came across clearly by the way they cut the documentary, but I hope that the AIC community has seen that it actually looks very different from the clips that they showed when a dog presses it as a trick versus not. And my dog can do both. So he started off and he has had a soundboard for a really long time. We're about to put it back up again after the move. But it looks very different even within that dog when he's pressing as a trick, which is a different sort of button design, and when he presses his actual buttons and how that behavior looks.
Just an anecdote, when I was watching with another button teacher, and when that came out at the beginning as a preview, we were both like, that looked like it was trick. Like that was not continuing communication. And then you acknowledge that later, but we're like, that's interesting that they started with that. So yeah, I thought it definitely came across.
Yeah, no, he started as communicative, and then I actually got different button designs and different colors for the documentary. So his buttons don't look like that. Trained it as a trick for the documentary, and then he could do it in that context as a trick, but at home, that's not how his button presses look. So it's really interesting that you can have both these things even within one individual, I think.
It is interesting. I'll ask one more question that I saw in the chat. I'm going to combine two questions into one, and then I asked Leo if he can let people unmute themselves in case anybody wants to ask. So, well, the first question was, will cats be included? Someone responded and said not yet. The follow-up question from someone else was, if we were interested in trying any of the trials with cats for our own curiosity, what would it be possible to get instructions?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you want to try, say, the impossible task with your cats, or if you want to try the citizen science study from the comprehension study, you can send me an email and I can send you the instructions. We keep good records of everything we've done, so we have these instructions written down as a PDF, and you can do some science yourselves. I think that, as I said, I would love to study cats, and if someone here wants to do a PhD on cat AIC, buttons, let me know. But I don't want to do cats a disservice by coming in as a non-cat expert and running these studies with cats.
May I share your email address in the chat?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I can put it in there as well. Okay, I'm typing it. Should be up there.
Thank you. Okay, I am going to remove the spotlight so I can see if anyone's hands are raised. If anybody has a question they wanted to ask directly, and you can also, if you're not comfortable unmuting, you can feel free to add another question in the chat. But I'll ask a question. I'm curious to know if there's anything more you can share about what maybe is coming in terms of understanding welfare benefits.
Yeah, so I can't say exactly what the study is going to look like because there's this whole like not biasing owners
Yeah.
and what we expect from their dogs. But we have the study that's coming up is going to be a sort of 2 to 3 week training study, which requires about 15 minutes training at a time, and it could be as little as 15 minutes a day. It is a big commitment, but I think that if we find the results that we're looking for, it's actually a very, 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 very cool result. So, this could be a big sort of impact paper and make a real difference to how people see AIC and their impacts on dog welfare and agency. So that is the goal. It's a sort of, as far as the dogs are concerned, it feels like it's a sort of treat finding task, but it's actually measuring welfare in an objective way that's really well reported in the literature. So I think it's going to be very cool. And we're comparing against non-soundboard using dogs as well. So we're going to get a real idea of how much this might change welfare compared to dogs that don't have soundboard experience. And I think that's what we want to see is how do these dogs compare to the average pet dog that doesn't have this level of agency and this level of communication with their owners.
Yeah, I think anecdotally, a lot of us have been surprised to find how much that seems to be factors for our learners.
Yeah.
I'm gonna answer Mary Robinette. Are you able to unmute yourself? Leo, are you able to, let me see if I can do it. Okay, how about now?
Should be working now.
Okay.
Okay, I am unmuted now. Hi. My question was, you mentioned that when you play the clip of Parker and the impossible that scientists that the jaws hit the ground, are you seeing changes in the way scientists are responding in general when you're at these conferences and talking about AIC?
Yeah, I am. There are some scientists that I think their opinions will never change. There's always the sort of cranky, people who've been around for 5,000 years, and I don't think their opinions can be changed. But we are seeing people be a lot more receptive than they have been in the past. So I'm seeing a lot more people want to start conversations with me that are collaborative and looking to build towards something rather than confrontational and telling us that there's nothing interesting going on there. So I think it's really interesting to see that shift. And I think it's particularly interesting to that shift because we only have 4 papers out, and I think that there is a lot more that can be shifted in this conversation, especially because we haven't even had a chance to address welfare yet. And one of the main criticisms that I'm still getting from trainers and scientists is that they're concerned that this is sort of reducing natural behaviors in dogs, which if you've seen the Parker clip for The Impossible Task is absolute nonsense, right? Because Parker first tries to get help from her owner with naturalistic dog behaviors, looking at her, pawing at her, climbing up Sasha's back, and only then does she go to the soundboard. Besides the fact that, as many of you will know, it is impossible to actually extinguish behaviors that are that basic and fundamental to an animal. But anyway, so I'm ranting now. But I get some of these comments, and I think that we can sort of help combat this with science, because there is no way that we are extinguishing their natural communication behaviors by giving them alternative ways to communicate more clearly with us.
Mira Remnant, did you want to ask your follow-up, and then I'll jump to Janine?
Okay, sorry, I could literally ask questions all day. One of the things that I think a lot of us experience is people showing up in our comments and saying things along the lines of that it is not cognitively possible for dogs and cats to understand words because they don't have the brain structure for it. How would you answer that question, or that very bad thing?
Yeah, there are many issues with that comment. I will say people get their sort of backs up when we use the words language or talking or anything like that. In our field, we talk about it in the sense of symbolic communication or the use of symbols, which seems to get people less upset. But I think the really critical thing that people need to understand is that there is no difference at the basic level of learning that a button is related to something in the world. There's nothing different between linking a word to an outcome in the world from, say, pressing a lever to get sugar, right? And rats can do that in Skinner boxes. So it's absolute nonsense that they wouldn't be able to link a sound to an outcome in the real world. And that is the basis not only of soundboard using animals, but also language, right? How do babies understand that a ball is called a ball? It's not magic, right? They actually associate ball with the outcome ball in the real world. And that's exactly what these animals are doing. The difference that we probably will encounter, the sort of barrier that we'll probably encounter at some point that distinguishes this from full-blown human levels of language, is that the animals are probably not using syntax and grammar in complex ways that humans are. And I don't think that means that they're not communicating, right? Like, people can communicate perfectly well without syntax. You can, for example, point at stuff in a foreign country and sort of use garbled, French or whatever when you're visiting a foreign country, and they still understand what you're saying. And I think that is the main point. What matters is that they're communicating and not that they're, little linguists and they're using syntax and grammar. And I think that's where people get really upset when we use the word language, because when they think about language, they think about grammar and syntax. And I don't think we should expect that of dogs and cats. I don't think it's even particularly important in terms of their welfare, whether they're using, syntactically correct sentences or not. It's more about, are they getting their feelings and their, thoughts heard? And are these then getting responded to? And are we seeing an improvement to their lives based on this two-way communication system? That's what I'm interested in. But I know that some people want to be combative and say, well, it's not language. And it's like, well, of course it's not language, they literally don't have the some would argue they don't have the cognitive mechanisms for syntax and grammar, but that's not what we're interested in. We're interested in the communication and the sort of two-way interactions that can come out of that.
I love that. Thank you. Janine, do you want to ask your question next?
Yeah, hi Amalia. I'm Janine, and Twiggy is my dog. When you said that you can tell the difference from body language from a trained trick pressing versus legitimate AIC use, I'm not sure the scientific community could do this, but I think it would be interesting to help the skepticism. We used to have this a lot more a couple years ago, but you've probably seen the dogs who use the big learning resource buttons, and they have like 4 of them in front of them, and they press "you're a bitch" or like swear words or whatever. And Morel, can you mute yourself? I'm overhearing.
Yeah, my cup is
Leo, are you able to
There
do
we go.
that?
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there was a couple years ago also terrible, it wasn't a research study, but it was a paper out of Europe about somebody who did a social media review of button videos, and they claimed that we were taking away all their agency and ignoring body language, all the stuff you were talking about. But if you could do a comparative analysis of button dogs who are swearing and pinpoint the body language and point to this looks trained, this looks trained, this looks trained versus
Yeah.
the ones in the AIC community and sort of make that public, it would help. I don't get a ton of skeptical comments, but I know bigger accounts probably do. It would help not only us on social media sharing this, I mean, who cares ultimately there, but in your field with all the people who might still be skeptics, if you can just show that you, with your own scientific eyes, can tell the difference, right, between legit and trained trick or done for attention or whatever you want to call that other bucket that's sort of like either taking on the popularity of buttons and then sort of making it a parody or something, right, versus legitimate communication. So just
Yeah,
curious what
I
you would
think
think
it,
about that.
no, I think it can be done. It would be a matter of sort of compiling videos, collected across things. We also, of course, wouldn't want to like shame anyone, so we wouldn't want to provide the videos as part of the resources of the study, right? Because you might really upset those influencers who train their dogs to use swear words, for example, even though you're
Mm,
not really using AIC. But I think there are a lot of telltale signs. So, for example, the dog not actually looking at the button, the dog not spending any time trying to find the correct button, dogs pressing one button and going on to like several other buttons in sort of immediate succession without any time. We see a lot of sort of thinking time with AIC dogs. During the internship, we watched many, many, many videos, and we watch this sort of pattern where they might leave the board and sort of circle for a bit and then come back, and we used to call that a thinking circle.
yeah.
So, you know, so I think there are clear patterns, and it's something that we could do. I will put that on my list. I didn't realize that like there was a need or a desire for this, but I can definitely put this on my list and put some undergraduates on it, and they could code some data because I do think that the pattern would be fairly obvious
Yeah.
once we start doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good to be able to just post
Yeah.
a link if a comment comes up, like here's people who know what they're looking for, wrote, here's how you can tell the difference. That's cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries.
There was another question from Gloria asking, do you have results from different age groups?
Different age groups of dogs? Is that what we're asking
I'm
about?
assuming, like in the experiment, did you find younger dogs learned
It's
differently?
really hard to say because, as I said, with the experiments, like the biggest experiment that we've run is 60 dogs. We don't have an enormous variance in age because a lot of these were dogs that were pretty young when COVID hit, and these were a lot of the dogs that were using AIC. Having said that, we have dogs in our database that have, well, at UCSD's database, I will say, that are 15, 16 years old and have many buttons, and I have visited. I think it was a 15-year-old dog at the time that was using buttons in their home, and they did well in the study. So I don't think there's any reason to believe that there's sort of a sensitive time period when they can learn this and then it shuts off. I think it can be learned throughout, but we don't have sort of very hard data on ideal ages or at what point cognitive decline starts influencing that. I mean, I'm sure that at some point cognitive decline affects this as it does everything else. But I don't have a reason to say, don't try this with older dogs because it won't work, because it seems that to some extent age doesn't matter all that much.
Gloria, did you have a follow-up question or a different question you want?
Yeah, I just wanted to, well, thank you. And just to clarify, like my dog, she's a Labrador Retriever, and I started her on buttons at 12 and a half, and she is 13 now. So I guess I was just curious to see in the studies, or to hear in the studies that you've run, if you've had a sample of dogs who had started very young or as puppies versus in like later adulthood, or in my girl's case as a senior, and she's doing great, by the way. But I am also noticing, bro, since she turned 13, that her hearing is starting to go. So I don't know that there's going to be any new buttons for her. So anyway, I was just curious to learn if you had encountered that kind of variable from when dogs were learning at a younger age versus an older age.
Yeah. Like I said, we've had older dogs participate in the studies and they did well. But yeah, as you say, once the owners notice, say, hearing is going, or maybe like eyesight is going, or there's like general cognitive decline because dogs can suffer from that as well, then it might be that, new buttons won't be taken up as well. But it will depend on the individual dog. And also we need to remember that dogs age in very different ways depending on the breed, right? So like a Chihuahua might be totally fine at 16, whereas, a Newfie would probably not be alive at that point. And so that's something that we need to account for as well, right? But yeah, I think it will depend a lot on the individual dog, but I definitely am not skeptical that older dogs can do it. I have seen older dogs that do buttons quite well, so. And yeah, true. Someone mentioned in the comments there are successful deaf learners. It might be more of an adaptation for a dog that has gone deaf rather than a dog that has been deaf for a really long time. But I agree that there's probably, yeah, Morgan commented this. There's probably ways that can be, they can be helped to continue the learning. So I don't think that we should be excluding dogs over a certain age from studies or anything like that. I have seen very promising results from learners that are older or have disabilities or other, different circumstances, and seen very good sort of AIC use from them.
Thank you.
Any other questions, anyone? Mary Robinette, speak now or forever hold your peace. You said you had, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I just wanted to give you a chance if you had any other questions.
I always have questions. So one of the this is I realize you need to be careful to not influence our behavior, but one of the things I'm excited about is to see where things are in like 20 years. So what kind of things do you think about when you're thinking about, oh, I wonder what the field will look like in 20 years?
Yeah. Wow, big questions. I think that there are many different avenues that we can pursue with this sort of this sort of community and this sort of research and this sort of training. So there's questions we can ask about how does this improve the life of dogs, and how does this improve their agency and their welfare, which I'm really, really interested in at the moment. There are also questions about what this means for symbolic interspecies communication, which is also fascinating, but slightly harder to answer. So for example, in the documentary, they mentioned questions of productivity and whether dogs might be productive. And for anyone who is in this community and has seen dogs combining buttons they haven't used before, the answer is, well, yeah, duh, they do. But it's actually really hard to prove because you have to provide evidence that that combination has never been modeled even verbally before. And so, you'd need an experimental context in which to bring that about. And then there's questions about what the buttons can tell us about their cognition that we might not be able to answer in a different way. So, for example, asking questions about dogs' sense of time or dogs' sense of smell, or what they understand of what their owners promised them and whether they expect them to hold on to their to be true to their promises and things like that. And I think that is sort of a later question, if you like, because we need to establish the more foundational questions first. So I think that if the community is engaged and happy to continue to participate in science, we easily have questions for the next 20, 30 years. And I think it would be really interesting because once we establish, okay, this communication system works and B, it's beneficial to dogs, the sky's the limit in terms of what you can test and try to understand of their minds that you couldn't ask any other way, right? And that's sort of just like to bring this back way to the start of the presentation. This is something that was unique about Kanzi, and the reason that I used Kanzi for the study that I did was that he understood English words, and so I could ask questions of Kanzi that I couldn't ask any other apes because he actually understood what we were asking verbally. And so we could sort of show that they have imagination and they can pretend, which is something that is almost impossible to prove experimentally in an ape without AIC training. So I think there's like billions of things that we really want to know about other animals' minds that we can't answer easily without AIC. And I think AIC can help us answer these questions.
Janine?
Me and Mary Robinette are tag teaming. So you talking about studies that could go on and on and on, and also mentioning Kanzi. One question about Kanzi that will lead me to my question about button users. Does Kanzi ever swear? Or did he adapt the
Kanzi
button to swear?
he didn't have the swear buttons, and I don't know if this was because I don't know if it was just like he was brought up in a like research context and scientists want to keep everything like really squeaky clean and so they wouldn't give him the opportunity. Most of his buttons were were requests. So he could ask for different types of food or he could ask for social interactions, like he could ask to be played or tickled with. But he didn't have swear words to the best of my knowledge.
So he never, and this leads me to the AIC thing. Strangely, across all households, as we've just talked to each other and seen on social media, many learners will take their potty button, their poop button, their litter box button, or their stinky button and use it out of context of needing to potty or smelling anything terrible. And if you look at context, like in my house, the cats might come too close to my dog while she has food and she growls and she'll go tell them they're stinky or she'll press litter box. And she did that before the cats were here too, using her potty button. If I say no to something, she might use potty, which doesn't like I could offer to take her outside, but she doesn't need to do that. I would be very curious anecdotally if you could just compile, across a bunch of households that's happened and then made conjecture across to why do humans also use excrement as swearing or complaining or venting, whatever it is.
That ties into like the sort of third sort of realm of questions that I address, which is like how they perceive their world and the cognitive capacities of animals, because one possible theoretical underpinning for this is that it's based on the emotion of disgust, right? So at least some of us, I have a dog that when he sniffs his own poo, he like demonstrates like facial expressions that suggest that he finds that unpleasant, even though he smells other dogs' poos and walks. So there might be some sort of link between sort of the emotional component of disgust and that, and therefore you could imagine how it's an easy bridge to sort of talking about other things that you don't like. It's really, really hard to do the sort of thing that you're suggesting, where we like bring together a bunch of anecdotes, and we have tried in the past and somewhat failed because a lot of scientists like to say a collection of anecdotes isn't data. And so you have to prove things experimentally to convince other researchers. I think that if Conti ever had done that, it would probably have been dismissed as an error, funnily enough. So it probably wouldn't have been, the behavior probably would have been extinguished because the researchers would have said like, oh, well, you're talking nonsense, Conti. But I also don't think that he would have been. Well, I know that he wasn't taught buttons for feces and pee because, apes don't have to request to go outside and they're not potty trained and things like that. So yeah, to get back to your question, I think that is really interesting and speaks to sort of the evolutionary origins of like disgust as an emotion. But I don't know that other scientists would be convinced by a collection of anecdotes. I think it would have to be more experimental than that to prove that there's something there.
So like not even household videos, not anecdotes, just me telling you that if I had videos of my dog
so that is
growling at my cat.
so that's that's a scientific annoyance as well, is that even if we have videos, that's still considered an anecdote because we don't. So when we talk about anecdotes, we mean anything that wasn't manipulated in an experimental way so as to lead to that sort of outcome. So, for example, you can have, if you have one-off observations of an animal doing something, it doesn't matter how fascinating it is, it will still be considered by the scientific community as an anecdote because you can't pinpoint what was going on through the animal's mind when they did that behavior. So you actually need to sort of start a probe at the psychological mechanisms that were present at the time to say that it's something beyond an anecdote. So we use anecdotes slightly differently to I think most people,
So even a series, if I gave you 50 videos, No good.
We'd have to test it in some way. We'd
Yeah.
have to say, okay, we're going to manipulate something in the environment that might trigger that button press, so that we know what it is that's causing that button press, and sort of
Yep.
try to isolate what it is that's causing the press, if that makes
Gotcha.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, thank you.
All right, I know we're up at time, so I'll take like do two more questions. One is from Morgan, asking, are there any planned studies to compare the learning and level of success with AIC of working dogs versus pet dogs?
Love that question because I'm a big fan of understanding variation across dogs. Um, Hopefully, yes, if we have the numbers for it, right? The problem there is numbers. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think like 90% of the AIC community is pet dogs. I could be wrong. But I think that's a really interesting question. And also, there's a lot of like variation what you mean by working dogs, right? Or like just dogs that have jobs. So it doesn't necessarily need to be the case that that dog is doing something 24/7 or is a like service trained task trained service dog or anything like that. But a lot of dogs have informal jobs, if you like. So my dogs, for example, I just had an exhausting weekend where they did barn hunt twice, rally obedience, and we did hoopers, which is a kind of agility that exists in the UK. So, they have jobs, they're working in some ways, but they're not working in the sense a lot of people mean when they say working dogs. There's also farm dogs. But yes, the point is, I think there might be differences in how the interaction occurs between humans and their dogs, depending on how much they do outside of, just casual being a dog, which is great. But I think that having jobs and working together changes that relationship. That's something that we're interested in. We start to address that question a little bit in the ongoing survey that we have, but it's not it's not positioned to answer the question fully and in terms of acquisition and how long it takes to train and that sort of thing. Sorry, Morgan, that was like a very convoluted answer, but what I'm trying to say is I love that question. I'm very interested in it. We are sort of hopefully going to be able to answer it if we have enough dogs, and we're building towards that.
I would like to ask a tangential kind of question to that related to like sample size and stuff. So as I believe you know, there's a number of dogs. I'm not sure what the number is, or learners, I guess, in general. I know Mary Robinette is about to have an in-person get-together with another cat learner, but there's a number of learners who get together with other learners and have access to each other's board. So is there any like plan in the future to study that about how they interact across boards, or like using, similar concept across boards with different words recorded on them, that kind of thing, and maybe what the sample size would be required for that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's quite difficult. We'd have to set it up in an intentional kind of way. So we'd have to say like,
Mm.
okay, Delmer, you're gonna go visit Bastion, and we want to like set up this and that situation and see if Delmer can like locate the buttons on Bastion's board. I think that it very much depends on how the dog is acquiring that information, right? So it might be that, if Delmer has seen Bastion press a particular button before, he might have learned that through social
Mhm.
learning, which is really interesting. And we
Yeah.
know that, anecdotally, it seems like some dogs are actually doing that in households where they're seeing another dog press and then learning from those presses. Um, but it also might be that, he observes the human doing it and then it's social learning from another species. It might be that he's sort of the first time accidentally presses it and then he sort of realizes that that button on Bastion's board is different from a similar location button on his board, for example. We don't have it just now because the complexity of asking this sort of question is sort of astronomical compared to studying one dog with their board, but it is really interesting.
You
And
need
I
like
like
a real world Big Brother type reality TV
exactly,
set,
yeah.
basically.
Exactly. No, but it's really interesting, and I like when I watch videos of get-togethers and them pressing on each other's boards, and I always wonder what's going on there. But I
I
don't
think
think it's something that's going to happen in the immediate future.
interesting. Thank you. All right, well, I think we're 5 minutes over, so I appreciate the extra 5 minutes you've given to us,
Okay.
and your time in general today. And I thank everyone else for coming and listening and asking your questions. I don't know if I missed anyone's questions in the chat. I tried to keep up on it. But thank you everyone for coming. I will share a screenshot potentially of the QR codes in the event on the event page in case anybody didn't grab that. I'll share that as well as the links in Amalia's email address. Amalia, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to wrap up with. I didn't mean to cut you.
No, that's it. Just thank you so much for your time. And this was great. I haven't seen all your faces for a really long time, and it was very nice to be here and see you all. So many people I recognize, and some dogs I recognize as well. Is that Adora Morgan in the background there? Yeah. So yeah, no, this was lovely, and thank you for making the time.
We have two quick follow-up questions. One is, can they share the codes, the QR codes with other teachers?
Yes, absolutely. You can share the QR codes with other teachers. And you can also share the QR codes with like dogs that are not soundboard using dogs, because for some of the research, we're comparing soundboard using and non-soundboard using dogs. So if you have friends, clients, family that have dogs that are not soundboard using dogs, we'd love to recruit them as well, because it will be a great comparison point for this population.
And there was also a question, can we have a list of the papers cited?
Yeah, I can send that around. I can send that to you, Kelly, if that does that
Okay,
work?
yeah. Yep, I can share that
Yeah,
in
we
the
can definitely
event
do that. I
page.
can share with links as well, and I can send you the PDFs in case, because I think one of them is behind a paywall, so I can send a PDF directly.
Awesome. Thanks, Amalia.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see everyone.
Thank you all.